Hello, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here with you. We've been sort of planning this for several weeks, and so it's great that we're engaged with it now. And thank you for the invitation to speak with you. Yeah, so really the day is broken into two parts. The first part is to really take a deep look at your collective chart that you created when you began your group back in January of last year, actually. Um, Excuse me, just a second. Something just popped up here, and it says something about what language am I using. As far as I know, it's still English. Um, Cancel. Okay. And so my goal is to really, in the first section, is to really help you understand the potential of the group chart and how you can be more effective in your healing work or your service work as a result of the chart itself. We'll also be looking at some major transits that are happening this year. Some huge changes are happening astrologically having to do with some of the outer planets. And I want to share with you what that's all about and the implications of that for your own life and your service work, you see. So that will be our first hour. We'll be focused on that. I'll talk for about 45 minutes, and we're going to open it up for a Q&A for about 15 minutes. And then, as Nicole had said, we'll go into part two. Part two is much more about looking how the esoteric philosophy views the world today and views how things are looking and the challenges that we're facing and the crisis, the global crisis, and how esotericism has ways of trying to understand what's happening. And again, my hope would be that in that section that you will glean some insights about yourself and your journey. So it's one thing to teach the philosophy, but it's another thing to make sure that people walk away with something that makes them feel more effective in their capacity to spiritually live and serve. So that's the hope. That's the hope. Okay. So the first thing I want to say is I'm going to put the chart, the group chart on the screen so we can all look at it. Um, but I want to first begin by saying that it's important to realize that the chart does not say this is so. Instead, the chart says here are patterns of probability and opportunity. But in this case, because it's a group chart, it's important that you realize that what I'm going to share with you represents not what the group is, but what the group is destined to be if all of you really work hard at developing a group collective field. Eventually, you start, after some time working together, you actually start building a collective causal body. But right now, we're talking about just really trying to identify how can we as a group activate more of this chart? Because the more you activate the chart in your lives, the more it benefits you. It benefits you. So let me put the chart on the screen and we'll go from there. Okay, so you should see it come up any moment now. Okay, so maybe some of you know this, but the chart has changed a little bit since the original chart. We altered it by about an hour. And I won't get into the reasons for that, but it just basically had to do with adjusting the time a little bit. So much of the chart is similar to perhaps the chart you had seen some time ago that was put together, I think by Nicole. Um, and so you'll see that there's going to be a lot of similarities, but there's a couple things that are a little different in this chart. So we have the birth time here as January 15th, 2024. We have it starting at 7:57 a.m. and in Melbourne. And so with that in mind, I'm not sure how many of you know how much you know about astrology, but just realize that the top half of the circle is the sky above the horizon on that day and at that moment, and the bottom half below the horizon. And what I want to do is I want to pull out the most important features of this to share with you. And we're going to start with the sun sign. Um, and your sun sign, of course, is the sign of Capricorn. Here's the sun. You were born in Capricorn. This chart was seeded in Capricorn. And you know, Capricorn is an interesting sign because it's a sign that in mainstream astrology, I sometimes think that Capricorn gets a bad rap because a lot of times in mainstream astrology, they look at it as a lot of power-hungry, egotistical people striving to power structures within society. But one of the things to keep in mind is the whole thing changes when you wake up to the soul. You see, Capricorn, as you probably know, is symbolic of a mountain and a goat climbing it. And the mountain is really important in the symbolism because it represents hierarchies. Hierarchies. And outwardly, there are a lot of hierarchies in society. It's why Capricorn is typically associated with supporting the business world because it's hierarchical, government because it's hierarchical, the military because it's hierarchical. But the big secret about Capricorn that traditional astrologers don't know about, and now you are going to know about, is that there are actually two mountains in Capricorn, not one. And it's when you're on the path and you've had an awakening to your own higher nature, your own higher promptings, that that's when the other mountain becomes the focal point of the life. And that mountain, it has a whole different set of rules for climbing it. The first mountain in mythology is often called the Mount of Ambition. And that is interesting because that's where the traditional view comes, ambitious people climbing power structures in the outer world. But the other mountain is called the Mount of Spirit. It's also called the Mount of Consciousness. And in a way, all of us are who are on the path are inwardly trying to climb an inner mountain. We're trying to lift our consciousness to a higher, wiser perch where we have the more broad, inclusive view. So Capricorn on a higher level is all about the inner climb, and the disciplines associated with doing it. Capricorn is one of the most disciplined signs of the zodiac. It's not surprising that the planet that rules it is Saturn, the great disciplinarian, which for you guys is down here. Okay, that's Saturn there. But when we look at it from a rheological perspective, your birth sign of Capricorn is one of the first ray signs. Capricorn is interesting. It's a sign that brings in three rays. Most of astrology, the signs bring in two rays or one ray, but there's a couple signs that bring in three, and Capricorn is one of them. But it's the first ray, the third ray, and the seventh ray. But the first ray is the ray of will and power. And it is said that Capricorn is where the so-called the will to achieve should arise. So, from a certain perspective, what does that mean to you as a group? The more you can inwardly and discipline your inner lives in terms of meditatively trying to find that deeper, subtler place, and more often, more and more try to look at the world with that alignment in your inner life, the more this chart comes alive for each of you and then collectively. So it's the great a sign of achievement, spiritual achievement. As you probably know, it's also the sign most associated with initiation, particularly the first, the second, and the third initiations. So it is possible that you as a group, depending upon how you work yourself, how you develop yourself, how you collaborate with yourselves, whether that it could offer some sort of initiatory opportunity for you. Now it's interesting because it's all in the as you can see, it's in the 12th house. And the 12th house is a kind of interesting house. It's a house of hidden things. And so a lot of times when a person has their sun in the 12th house, they're a little bit more withdrawn and there's a lot happening inwardly behind the scenes. So it may be that this group, some of its greatest strength is actually not visible to the group in the immediacy of your exchange, but instead there's something deep and powerful there for you. Interestingly, it's also conjunct the planet Pluto, and that's very important because Pluto is the great transformer. And Pluto dives down deep to help us understand what needs to be transformed in us individually and what needs to be transformed in you collectively along the way. So both Pluto there as well as the Sun in the 12th house, both of them kind of pull the life consciousness from a strong public view to a much more interior, private view, you might say. Now, as you probably know, friends, in esoteric astrology, the rising sign is incredibly important as well. And your rising sign is Aquarius. You had it in the old chart too. It was also Aquarius, as I recall. So I really want to highlight this, and it's right here in the chart. This line here is the eastern horizon. The Earth and you as a group are right here. And this is the east. I know it kind of looks west, but it's east. And this is Aquarius. It looks like about half of the sign of Aquarius was above the horizon when this group was born, and half below the horizon. Now, in traditional astrology, the rising sign is often representing persona, how you are seen in the world, or how you'd like to be seen. But in esoteric astrology, it says that if a person has, or now a group, has truly awakened to their higher nature, then that rising sign takes on a much higher meaning. It can indeed represent the group's soul potential and its purpose. So we really want to look at this. It kind of makes sense. It is the sign in the east, and east is the direction of spirit, and it's rising. So it can symbolize the soul's rising intention. So it's the group's soul the group's soul sign would be Aquarius. So let's talk Aquarius for a bit. Aquarius is first it's a mental sign, an air sign, not a water sign. Some people think it's water, understandably, but it's not. And it's all about unconventional thinking. You know that old saying, thinking outside the box? Oh boy, that's a real Aquarian phrase if I ever heard one. And and one of the amazing things about Aquarius that is going to be your gift, if the group rises to the occasion, is that Aquarius helps to shape into the mind of its recipients a sensitivity to the new paradigms that are cresting on the shores of humanity's consciousness, and to be a voice in support of those new and emerging paradigms. So Aquarius is a very, very progressive sign. It's kind of cutting edge. There's a pioneering quality to it. And so in that sense, what does that say about you as a group? You as a group of collaborators. Oh, and by the way, Aquarius also rules groups. So your soul sign is Aquarius. It's the sign of group, and you are a group. So that's really quite a positive development as well. But the thing is, what this tells me is that you're a group of people that have the potential to bring something new into outer expression on behalf of humanity's betterment, being something unconventional, cutting edge. Now, of course, esoteric healing is unconventional. So, in a certain sense, esoteric healing and the things you do already um, are imbued with unconventional elements to them. But nonetheless, really, it's important to see yourself as an advocate of the new. So Aquarius is very much like that. Another thing that's so interesting about Aquarius, and it'll be interesting to see how you folks start to recognize it, is that it's a sign that also tries to shape into human consciousness a recognition of humanity's oneness. But you see, it does it in a very, very unique way. It's all about helping us sense humanity's oneness by recognizing humanity's sacred diversity. So it's oneness realized through diversity, not uh, not the other way around. In other words, yeah, some of the other signs of the zodiac can stimulate a perception of oneness as well, but more often than not, it's oneness as sameness, but not in Aquarius. It's oneness through differentness. And if you think about it, what's going on in the world today, and I'll talk more about it in the second hour, much more, but just to introduce a concept here is that um, fundamentally, the crisis in the world today it's rooted in humanity's growing recognition that we have to look at life through the lens of the one humanity. We've got to find our oneness. And And yet, if you think about it, the the complexities of society today, cultural differences, historical patterns, um, and if you look at the whole spectrum of the human kingdom today, really it's complex. And my question would be rhetorically to you is how in the world could we possibly find our oneness but through an honoring of our diversity? How it couldn't be done otherwise, you see. So it's so interesting to think about how humanity is at this critical point where it has to organize itself in support of the one humanity, and it does it by needing to honor diversity. And here we're going into the age of Aquarius, and it's meeting us precisely where we're at. And that's not an accident. That's just how the macrocosm and the microcosm converge and synchronize with each other. But I bring this up because you are Aquarian. So you, as a group, have the potential of collectively sounding a new and progressive note through your interests and your common ground, and I assume a lot of having to do with alternative healing, that you can make a real progressive difference by recognizing that that's what you're supposed to do, supposed to really, really bring something forward that's cutting edge. Now, having said that, let's look at a couple other things here too, because one of the things I would say is that, and I say this when I do readings for people privately, is that this tells me that the group soul that you're slowly trying to build is an Aquarian soul. And so deep down in the core of the group is this Aquarian potential. But it's it's the sign of Capricorn that is said to be the deliverer. So think of Aquarius and the fact that all of you are connected to Aquarius. Think of that as being um, somehow soulful essence as a group. But see Capricorn as the chosen instrument of delivery. So it's progressive ideas, sounding the note of oneness through diversity, group collaborative efforts. Science, by the way, is also governed by Aquarius. And and there's something core about those ideas as it pertains to the soul potential of your group. But you want to find ways of taking that Aquarian insight, but delivering it to the outer world in a Capricornian fashion. So it should be practical, it should be grounded, it should be well organized, it should be presented in a way that facilitates growth and evolution. So it's a combination of kind of combining or fusing the rising sign with the sun sign. Many of you have probably studied esoteric psychology, which is really a study of rheology. And we often talk about in that division of esotericism, we talk about soul personality fusion. Soul ray tries to infuse itself into the personality ray. Well, by analogy, in esoteric astrology, the soul personality fusion is by analogy equivalent to the fusion of the rising sign energy and the sun sign or birth sign energy. So keep all of that in mind. Now, as I mentioned, this chart is slightly different than the one that you looked at before. And I did a comparison to see what's moved, and you've got a few planets. For instance, in the old version, the moon was in the first house, now it's in the second house. In the older version, Chiron, which is down here, Chiron was it had moved from the second house to the third house, and probably most importantly, Jupiter and Uranus moved into the fourth house. So there's what's changed is not so much the planetary positions, that hasn't changed, but what did change is how do they fall into houses. So for instance, let's talk about this. Your rising sign is Aquarius. Now, the traditional view of the rulers of Aquarius is that the ruler of Aquarius is the planet Uranus, traditionally. For those of you who are not familiar with astrology enough, just a ruler is every sign of the zodiac has a planet in our solar system that governs it or is representing it, and that we call a ruler. And so whenever you think of Uranus, it's sort of the representative of Aquarius. Interestingly, in esoteric astrology, there's a higher tier of rulers, and they represent the soul nature of a sign. So it's one of the differences in traditional versus esoteric is traditional view only has one tier of rulers, and that governs personality life, where the esoteric view has another tier of rulers called the esoteric rulers, and they represent the soul vibration of a sign. And it happens that although Uranus is the traditional ruler, the esoteric ruler, the soul ruler, is Jupiter. So they're both the ruler of both levels of Aquarius, which are important, are found in the fourth house now. So let's talk about that. The fourth house plays a hugely important role now. Now, houses are interesting. They represent departments of life. And the fourth house in traditional astrology is most associated with things like home or the nest, um, or the mother principle. And all of that's got merit. That's got merit for sure. Um, but all of these houses on an esoteric level are really custodians of sacred spiritual principles. And the fourth house, its sacred principle is the principle of foundations. The principle of foundations. What I mean by that is that if let's say if you look at the fourth house, if it's usually about the mother, well, look, mother is very foundational to life. If we think about the fourth house as the home or the nest, well, the nest is also very foundational to life. So on a much deeper, more principled level, this is said to be the house of foundations, the house of foundations. So you've got so there's something here about the two ruling planets of your soul sign in the house of foundation. As I look at it, I would conclude that this group, if it really, really gets integrated well, and it may already be, I don't know enough about your group, but it may already be integrated enough, but see your work as laying a foundation upon which others can grow and thrive because of the confidence in the foundation that you have laid. Laying a foundation for new healing practices, for instance, whatever that means to you in terms of laying a foundation, this would be really good. Also, very interestingly, is that you have a fairly rare aspect on this thing, and it's right here. If you can see my pointer, this green line here is called a quincunx, and it's connected to Uranus here. And over here, it's connected to the south node. But then there's another green line from here to here. And these are called quincunxes. They represent 150-degree angles. And friends, in many ways, astrology is just about geometry. So you've got a 150-degree angle here, another one here, and then you've got this line here, which is called a sextile, and it's connecting them to the whole thing. So it's kind of an elongated triangle. That in astrology is called a yod. Sometimes people call it a yod. And you don't see them too often, but the word yod, I believe, actually is rooted in Judaism. I think in the Jewish religion uses that a lot, and it references what is sometimes called the finger of God. The finger of God. Um, yeah, not to be confused with God giving one the finger. Okay, but the finger of God. So wherever it's pointing to, and it's pointing right here, it's as if God is pointing to this place and saying, here is where you want to put your attention. Fourth house, Uranus, unconventional, laying a new foundation. And the key word is new, because Uranus is all about, if it represents Aquarius, and Aquarius is about advocating the new, you can bet that its ruling planet is also trying to advocate the new. So you have a very beautiful kind of destined potential here to be subservient to the will of divinity or the will of the Logos with that configuration. And the other two planets that are the other two things, this is the south node at 19 degrees, see, 19 degrees of Libra, Venus, 19 degrees Sagittarius, Uranus, 19 degrees Taurus. It's a perfect yod, actually. And these two are said to be supportive energies that make you more successful in bringing this forward into the world. One of them is Venus. Venus is all about love. Venus is about appreciation. Venus is about the arts and culture. Um, and the other is the South Node in Libra. Now, some of you probably know that the nodes, there's a South Node and a North Node down here, but the South Node often represents the past and people from the past. And so this and Libra has to do with right relationship. So there's something about getting into right relationship with other people, potentially people that you've known for a while, and awakening more the love and creative potential within you. And then it's through those two perspectives that you can more effectively bring forth the urge to bring something collectively into the world in service to humanity and lay a foundation. Lay a foundation. Now, one of the things, there's so much to astrology, and every astrologer sort of has their own way and their own what they perceive as being um, the most important. And one of the things that I put a lot of importance in is this point up here. So, friends, this is called the midheaven, and it's the power point for the 10th house. To give you an idea how that's determined is realize that right here is where you as a group are, and this was what was right above the group in Melbourne. So and it's right above the birth moment, and it's touching the zodiac in the sign of Scorpio. So this tells me that the whole 10th house is to be ruled by Scorpio. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that the 10th house in traditional astrology, the 10th house is often related to your authority or your career, your work in the world, your career. This point, the power point for the 10th house in the East is sometimes called the point of dharma, your incarnational responsibilities. And it can also be in our language, in esotericism, this could be really restated as ashramic responsibility. Responsibility to the inner ashram, the place from which the soul comes forth, or in this case, the place, the ashram from which you as a group are being inspired. And it's Scorpio, friends. It's Scorpio. So let's talk about Scorpio for a minute at the midheaven. Scorpio is not an easy sign. The Tibetan calls it the sign of the test, the sign of the test. He also calls it the sign of discipleship because it's in Scorpio where the disciple or the group has to prove its fitness to serve the greater life. Because, out in the spiritual community outside there in the world, talk is cheap. But here, Scorpio, you got to prove yourself. You got to prove yourself. And one of the things that's so important about Scorpio is that it's a sign that has a lot to do with transformation. It's the great sign of transformation. Its ruling planet, its traditional ruling planet is Pluto down here. So you've got Pluto next to the sun, which is your identity. So you got the representative of the work you do in the world conjuncting your sense of identity. That's good too. That's a really good development in terms of supporting who you are by what you do as a group. But also know that Scorpio is the sign that rules the whole profession of psychology. And when you have Scorpio at the midheaven, it's important to really be attentive to psychological considerations when serving others. Many, many years ago, before I ever did this kind of work, I was a psychology instructor at a university in California many years ago. Truthfully, it almost feels like another lifetime ago. But back in those days, we used to, as teachers, we used to talk about therapeutic processes in psychology and refer to it as a process of sort of peeling back the layers of an onion. What's behind this? What's behind this? What's behind this? And in a way, with Scorpio at the midheaven, you want the work you do collectively together to have a bit of that, upon sort of looking deep into things, not taking things at superficial value, but looking more into the subtler, deeper dimensions of people or institutions or whoever you collectively are trying to serve. In other words, I guess what I'm trying to encourage all of you to think about, and maybe you already feel you're doing this, is that try to look at the work you do together and even the work you do independently. It's really helpful to look with psychological eyes. And you can start to get a deeper sense of other people or other institutions, because Scorpio in psychology doesn't necessarily always mean human. For instance, again, long ago when I was working in the business world and I was a trainer, I was a trainer of managers in a big corporation many years ago. Um, there's a whole branch of psychology called industrial psychology. So they're looking what's behind the scenes, what's going on, but they're looking at it in terms of the psychology of an organization and how they work. So in other words, it's not just confined to psychology for humans, even animal psychology. Some of you may be drawn to serve the animal kingdom, and if you are, then Scorpio represents the same idea, but now looking more deeply at animal psychology. I'm just using that as an example. So very important, very important. Um, and now back to here, though. So you've got Jupiter here. Jupiter is the spiritual ruler of your soul sign. Now, Jupiter's fantastic, friends. It is, let me give you key words to understand Jupiter. Fulfillment, goals and dreams and aspirations and yearnings, expansion, wisdom, joy, meaningfulness, um, coming into yourself. All of those are sort of Jupiterian qualities. It's like everybody's favorite planet. And it's the sole ruler of Aquarius. And it's a second ray entity, the planet, it's a second ray entity. Now, not only is it placed very strongly in the fourth house, which again has to do with foundations, but it does bode well. It's aligning with this line here, which also aligns with the PowerPoint for career here. And so you've got Jupiter that's supporting both the building of the foundation and the expansion of that foundation, but also anything that's happening on one side of the chart can have a reflection effect on the opposite side of the chart. And that's most certainly here. So I don't know to what extent, for instance, Jupiter is a teaching planet. In fact, some people call it the guru in the chart. If you as a group find yourself starting to want to teach some of the things that you're learning together and building understanding of, Jupiter in that position can be very, very good for you. So I would encourage you to think about that, to think about that. You also have some interesting things going on here in the sense that uh, the moon is in the second house, Neptune is in the second house, and Saturn is in the first house, but nudging toward the second house. Now, the second house is in traditional astrology has a lot to do with money and material things and comfort. But on an esoteric level, it's the house of values. And so with this amount of energy in this part of the sky, it's important that as a group, you want to make sure that you live your service work with an attitude of conforming to the values you truly espouse, you see. Yeah. Now, one of the things that I wanted to also point out to you is that there's some transits that are happening. I'm going to take this chart down and I'm going to put up a transit chart to show you something else that I think is important. So just bear with me a moment. Okay, so I've just put up another chart, and it's a little bit more complicated looking because it's actually two charts in one. So this is the birth chart of the group, just a miniature of what we were just looking at. And this is a transit chart. It's showing me where key planets are in the sky right now. Not all the planets, but the important ones. And every time I click this, I can see the outer wheel, the real sky, move in monthly increments. And so watch. See? And this is where predictive astrology comes into play. Well, because it's you've only been together a year, there's not a lot of changes. Like Pluto's just barely moved in the year that in what is it, a year and 3 months since you came into being as a group. Uh, Neptune has moved just a little bit. And we also see that Uranus here has moved just a little bit. So there's when you talk about transits, there's not a lot of big changes here because you're so young as a group. But there is a couple, like for instance, this is very important. First, let me get are we here? Yeah. So right now, look at this. Jupiter, which is the planet that was here when you were born, in that year, it moved that far because Jupiter moves a little faster. It only takes 12 years to go around the wheel, where Uranus takes 84 years to go around the wheel. So right now, you as a group have Jupiter. It moved out of the fourth house, and now it's working its way through the fifth house. So let's talk about that. This is your sole ruler, friends. It's in Gemini, and Gemini is the sign that's most associated um, with language and with communications. And so that's one consideration. If you think of Jupiter as being the planet of wisdom, as it's working its way through Gemini, it can enhance collectively your own capacity to express wisdom. But keep in mind that that's true with everybody, because Jupiter's in that sign for everybody in the world. But it's not in the fifth house for everybody, but it is in the fifth house for you folks. So what's the fifth house? Well, the fifth house is interesting because it's a very creative house. And so this is a wonderful time for you as a group to, if you wanted to kind of dive into some creative project, boy, it doesn't get better than Jupiter going through the fifth house. You only get this every 12 years. So it's wonderful for that possibility. It's also, it is said that the fifth house rules children. Well, most of us are not children, but it can represent the child in you. And so whenever I see Jupiter in the fifth house, I always think, I hope you're having some fun, because it's time to have some fun as well. But it's also a wonderful time for um, doing something collaboratively that's creative. And it'll be there for about a year, I think. Let me just check that. Oh, it's going pretty fast. Maybe it'll be out of there by, yes, it leaves in August. I think it might retrograde back. Nope, it doesn't retrograde back far enough. Okay. So from now to August is a really wonderful time if you as a group wanted to take on a new creative project together. It's wonderful in that sense, in that sense. Now, one of the things I want to share with you as well is I want to talk about certain planets that are we've got something very, very unusual happening this year. Several outer planets like Uranus, like Jupiter, like Saturn, like Neptune. These are very, very distant planets that take many, many years to go all the way around the zodiac. There's about three of them that actually are moving into a new sign. And that doesn't happen that often, let alone all at about the same time they're doing this. So it's a very rare kind of thing. And so let me show you, I'm going to put another chart up for you to see this. Bear with me as I get that located here. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. Okay, now the main thing to keep in mind here is that we've got three planets that I've highlighted. All of them are playing very strongly right now. This is Neptune, and on August 25th, it will reach the 1 degree mark of a new sign of Aries. At the same time, Uranus will reach the 1 degree mark in the sign of Gemini, and we now have this Pluto, which is now at the 1 degree mark in the sign of Aquarius. So both of these are very slow planets. You know, Uranus takes 84 years to go around the wheel. Neptune takes, what is it? I think it's 164 years to go around the wheel. And Pluto takes 248 years to go around the wheel. So for all of these to come together like this is really interesting. I'm particularly interested in these two. Um, and this all starts about in August, where these two planets, Uranus and Neptune, go into a perfect sextile. Think of Uranus as the planet most associated with spiritual awakening. It enlivens. It's said the Tibetan calls it the planet of electric fire, awakens things. And think of Neptune as being deeply spiritual and has a lot to do with cultivating sensitivity to subtle patterns within. So a deeply spiritual, intuitive planet is Neptune, while Uranus is a very electrical, firing, waking up energy. So when you get these two together like this, it can really represent a new awakening, friends. A new spiritual awakening is at hand. And that's quite exciting. In fact, interestingly, that combination, the last time that happened, where those two planets came into that kind of configuration, it happened in the late 60s. I think it was 67 and 68 that that happened. And that's, for most of us, we would probably agree that it's 1968 was like a lot of social change was happening. A lot of awakening was happening at that time. Well, so if it gives you a sense of it hasn't happened since then, and now it's going to happen again. Now, these planets are going to, what in a way, this year is interesting because they are, I don't know if you know what retrogrades are, but planets, they move around the zodiac. They go 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So these planets, these two, are going to step into these new signs this this summer in the northern hemisphere, and then they're going to back off, and they're going to fall back in retrograde back to the previous sign that they've just been in for years, and then they're going to go full force back into the new signs, and then they'll be there for years in those new signs. Um, so look at this year as being a year where some very fundamental new patterns about spirituality and spiritual awakening are likely to be seeded, and that over the year they will slowly germinate, and that next year, I believe it's in the first or second quarter of next year, is when they start to they return, and now it's full blown. This trine is full blown, and so this is a year of seeding the future, seeding the future. Neptune, as I said, will be going into the sign of Aries. Now, Neptune is as I said, it's all about mystical yearning, insight, creative. This can be very good. Neptune and Aries can be very good from a certain point of heightening the mystical awarenesses we have and providing insightful, creative forms to live by. It's also filled with Christ. You know, Neptune is the planet most associated with the Christ. If you ever want to know where Christ is in your chart, look to Neptune. So this can be a real, see, Aries has a lot to do with initiating something new. Aries, the only two signs of the zodiac that initiate the new are Aries and Aquarius. And so we have that same energy of initiating the new, but now it's Piscean, or sorry, it's Neptunian. So it's new spiritual insight, new spiritual agenda, that sort of thing. Now there's all things have their negative potentials. And one of the negative potentials of this of Neptune going into Aries is that it can lead to confusion and uncertainty by some people because these are opposite elements. In a way, Neptune is very watery and Aries is very fiery. And when you put water and fire together, you get steam, and steam obscures vision. Another negative potential with Neptune there is that it can create um, a kind of devitalization of people. It can devitalize your etheric energy. So that's something to consider as well. Um, Now it's not showing here. I don't have it on this graphic, but let tell you what, let me go back to the other graphic I was showing you and put that back up on the screen. Okay, so what I also want to show you is right here. I'm going to pull this up so that if you notice, here's Jupiter, and I told you it's going through Gemini, but it too is going to enter into a new sign. It's going to enter into the sign of Cancer. And Cancer is very much like the fourth house. It has a lot to do that can result in an expanded understanding of what is home. It can help people realize that that more and more that your home is not the four walls you live in. Instead, spiritually, it's important to expand your notion of home and realize that the entirety of your life is home, and that every department of your life, whether it's career, friendships, interests, um, partnerships, all of those are like larger rooms in a larger home. And so, from a certain perspective, I think that transition into Cancer can be very positive in terms of awakening us to a greater understanding of what family really is, and maybe even help us to better understand that all of humanity in a way, is one family, one family. So that's an important transit as well. Um, and as I say, Uranus will be going into, let me just get that set up here. So by July, Uranus just creeps into Gemini. That can trigger that can trigger new innovative thinking. Um, it can create a whole emphasis on intuitive recognition. It can heighten intuitive realizations of mind. It can create huge amounts of creative thought. And so it's quite exciting what Uranus could do once it gets into Gemini. And that only happens every 84 years. So for you and I, if you're 84 years old, you've seen this before. But if you're not, we haven't seen Uranus in Gemini in the past at all. So anyway, it's a very exciting time, and as I say, to have this planet go into a new sign, Uranus, it only moves into a new sign every 7 years. Jupiter does move into a new sign every year, but then here's Saturn. Saturn is also going to move into a new sign. It's going to move into the sign of Aries. And Saturn and Aries, remember, Aries is an initiate. Aries is the warrior. Aries is pushing something out. It's got a lot of will to it. Saturn can represent a more disciplined approach to wielding will on behalf of humanity. It can represent a tendency to recognize the importance of committing to a new cycle of development. Aries is always about the beginnings of things. It's the first sign of the zodiac. Saturn has so much to do with buckling down and getting focused and disciplined. And Saturn is also the Lord of karma. So it can represent the end for humanity, the end of a karmic cycle of transformation and the birth of a new karmic cycle to be worked through in the human family. So it's all tied together, all tied together. Okay, I can see the time has just zoomed by. This actually would be a pretty good time to open it up for some questions and answers. So let's do that. And I assume that Nicole or somebody is compiling that.
Susie's asking Can you comment upon the very right aspect in the natal chart between Chiron and the North Node?
Okay. The fact that they're conjunct is, I guess, what she's asking. Let me put
Yeah.
it up on the screen so people can see what I'm talking about. So, or she's talking about. Right down here, this is Chiron, and this is the North Node. Well, I think that that's a really important combination. First, understand that. Well, let's first talk about what the North Node is and the South Node. I mentioned the South Node because it was part of your yod. But the nodes are actually not objects in the sky. They represent the place on the day the group was born where the path of the sun and the path of the moon crossed. So all of you know what an eclipse is. An eclipse can only happen at one of those two nodes. And in that case, it's not just that the paths cross, but the two objects happen to get there at the same time. That's an eclipse. And in astrology, the north and south node represent the future and the past. The north node is much more related to the future, and the south node much more related to the past. In fact, many astrologers will tell you that the north node is one of the clues to the soul's purpose. And I would agree with that, as well as the rising sign is also a big part of that. So, and Chiron is called the wounded healer. So Chiron would be very much related to the kind of work you folks are interested in. And Chiron has a lot to do with many other things as well. It's the underlying principle behind it is that we heal from our own wound. Sort of the drug addict later becomes the substance abuse counselor. We're always best at healing others if we've been through our own similar health issue, you see. But also know that Chiron is much more than just on healing. In fact, it has another name that people don't often refer to. It's been called the guide into the mysteries, the guide into the mysteries. And so if I interpret it that way here, it would seem to me that the group has some real support to move forward in an Aries way. Aries is also about bringing forth the new. Aries is trying to assert a new principle with will and confidence. And you can see that principle playing out in terms of greater healing capacity for your group. The more you can collectively, as a group, the more you can identify with the key things that you collectively want to bring into the world to help humanity from a healing perspective, the more this chart comes alive. On the other hand, um, the Chiron position can also represent the teacher, the guide into the mysteries. Chiron's just as much about teaching and education as it is about healing. And often Chiron represents your gifts. What are the deeper gifts that the group has? The Tibetan tells us that gifts come from the soul, the causal body, whereas talents come from the personality and skills are developed by the personality during the life. But gifts are soulful. And sometimes Chiron, if it's in an important place, and I would say this is an important place, that Chiron does have an ability to awaken the group to some of its gifts that it doesn't know it has. So, and it's all in the third house. And the third house has so much to do with language and communications. So I don't know if you folks have any kind of written collective work that you do, but many writers come out of the third house, many teachers come out of the third house. So I would say it's a very good thing, Susie. I think it's a very good combination, particularly with a group like you. You want to bring forth the new, a new kind of healing, a new understanding of the dynamics of healing and its relationship to spirit. And and at the same time, you want to find ways of communicating it. And that's the third house. So I would look at this very favorably for the group. Okay, any other questions?
There's no other question, but however, Tia made the comment that in 1968, there has been the offensive in Vietnam, the assassination of Luther King, Robert
Hmm.
Kennedy, and the civil rights of
Yeah,
1968. So there has been a lot of changes, social changes
right.
during that time.
So true, so true. And so we can expect that that trine that I showed you between Neptune and Uranus, that can trigger, it's the same kind of thing that it can trigger. In fact, it's already kind of warming into it, and we certainly see a lot of chaos right now and social change trying to happen, but it probably just going to get worse for a while. But remember, it's just seeding now. It's next year where it really plays strong in the chart. But yeah, yeah, 68 was huge, huge. In addition, and this is a kind of a separate subject, but it's kind of related to part two of our time together, is, the Tibetan talks about what are called the vestures of the Buddha, the vestures of the Buddha. And the vestures of the Buddha are, it is said in legend that when the Buddha died, he left his vestures uh, in a condition where they would not dissolve back into the reservoir. And what are the vestures? He left his mental body and his intuitive body intact. And the hierarchy of masters are said to hold that those vehicles intact. And it was predicted that he because he and the Christ go back a long way. They go all the way back to Atlantis. But I don't know if you know this, but the current holder of the Christ is the Maitreya. The Christ office is the Maitreya. But before the Maitreya, it was the Buddha that held that office. So when the Buddha died, he left his vestures because he saw in the future that his brother, the Maitreya Christ, would come into an important role as we entered into the Aquarian age. And it is said that the Christ will, quote, assume the vestures of the Buddha, meaning integrate those vehicles into his own mechanism. And I forget the exact, it was either 66 or 68 that it was 1968 or 66, where it was predicted that that would take place. So again, wow, what an amazing time in the late 60s. And if it did happen, because we don't know if it actually happened, but if it did happen where the Christ assumed the vestures of the Buddha, then that really speaks of getting close to the reappearance of the Christ and has a lot to do with what we're about to talk to in our second hour here. Um, yeah, so it's quite an exciting possibility. And what it does mean is that the role of the Maitreya as we go into the Aquarian age and as humanity eventually takes the first initiation, the role of the Maitreya will be to be a bridge between East and West. And so it'll be a more universalizing thing. The Buddha was the East, the Christ is the West, and now we have a contribution of sheaths of intelligent substance of the Buddha to add to the Christ's wisdom. And so we'll have a world teacher who has what it takes to be truly a world teacher rather than a regional teacher for humanity and to inaugurate the dawning of the Aquarian age. Okay. Are there any other questions? If not, I'll just kind of move on to the other subject.
One last, I think it's more a comment from Tia. She says, with Chiron in Aries and the North Node in Aries, could it not also indicate intensified focus on I amness, one's sense of identity, and a beckoning to work towards standing in spiritual being and moving from externals to identification in bringing forth purpose and work?
Mhm. Yeah, I think I could see that as well. Identity is very connected to two signs, Aries and Leo. And so one could argue that the North Node is all about identity and um, in many ways to identify with a deeper part of you rather than the external forces of you. Chiron can facilitate that as well. So there might be some healthy, I'd agree, healthy new identifications that are more true to your spiritual life than your personality life that could arise from that. If that's what Tia is saying, yeah, yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's making the comment that it's shifting from a third ray focus to a first ray orientation, with consciousness acting as the mediating principle with a mental plane emphasis.
Okay. Yeah. Well, has a lot to do with the mental plane. Remember the mantra for Aries. It goes like this: I come forth and from the plane of mind, I rule. I rule. So yeah, no, I think it's good. And so you guys should always be, look, I said it earlier and I'll say it again, it bears repeating. Two signs of the zodiac are all about advocating the new. One is Aquarius, which I told you is your soul sign. The other is Aries, which I told you see is connected to your North Node, and the North Node is often associated with soul purpose. So both of the things in this chart that emphasize soul purpose are also the two signs that emphasize cutting edge perspective, pioneering in some way. Okay, so I hope you folks are really kind of following through with that. And the more you can follow through with it, the more this chart comes alive. And so much of it, friends, is, as I said at the beginning, this is not saying this is so, this is saying this was what could be, depending upon how you work together, depending upon how you build understanding together. For years, you can be a group and you can be building common understanding, common wisdom, which is great. And there comes a point in your development where the common energy that you've put together of wisdom that has accumulated collectively among you, eventually that common wisdom found on the higher mental plane will attract solar angelic intervention. And then eventually a solar angelic life will imbue itself into that and then truly create a causal body for the group. Now, it's tough to get there. You have to do a lot of work ahead of time to really demonstrate that you have this kind of inner fusion of understanding of things. But once you reach a certain point, it will become invocative. And then if the solar angel does come and infuse itself into your collective united wisdom, it will be a great enhancement to the wisdom you already have together. So I hope you just keep doing what you're doing and understand that that principle is going to help you along the way. Okay. Anything else, Nicole?
No more question. Thank you,
No more questions. Okay.
Liam. No.
Okay.
I
Well,
did I
yep.
did have one last point, Nicole, there at the end. The part of fortune also very importantly on the 0 degree of Aries mark as well. I just
Yeah.
thought that was interesting too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. That's right. I overlooked that, but that's quite true. So this is the part of fortune that Susie's talking about. I think that was Susie anyway. And so that's Aries. So you got the part of fortune is just a mathematically created point that is said to be of fortune when things are happening around it. And indeed, it just further accents the importance of Aries in your chart. No question about it. No question.